The invitation lay on the worn pine of the kitchen table, an island of impossible gloss in a sea of humble reality. It was thick cardstock, cream-colored and embossed with a silver crest that seemed to mock the chipped ceramic of Ethan Vance's coffee mug. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake, coiled and ready to strike. The annual St. Jude's Children's Hospital Benefit Gala. A world he had burned to the ground and salted the earth behind him. Or so he had thought. "Is that for the party, Daddy?" Ethan looked up. His daughter Lily stood in the doorway of the small kitchen, her 7-year-old frame swallowed by a dinosaur print pajama top. Her hair was a wild tangle of blonde curls, and her eyes, the same impossible blue as her mother's, were wide with a hope that felt like a physical blow. He forced a smile, a creak and groan of unused muscles. "It's just some fancy mail. Sweet pea. Probably a mistake." She padded over, her bare feet silent on the scuffed linoleum, and peered at the invitation. Her small finger traced the silver crest. "It says Gala. That's a party. A big one." Mommy liked big parties. Ethan's breath hitched. He had built this life, this small, anonymous existence in a 2-bedroom apartment above a bakery, for the express purpose of escaping those 2 words, Mommy liked. He had traded a penthouse overlooking the city for the constant, comforting smell of baking bread. He had traded a garage full of luxury cars for a reliable 10-year-old pickup truck that always smelled faintly of sawdust. He had traded the name Ethan Vance, a name that opened every door, for Mr. Vance, a quiet carpenter who kept to himself and paid his rent on time. He had done it all to build a fortress around Lily and around his own shattered heart. His wife, Eleanor, had thrived in the world of galas and benefits. She had been a comet, brilliant and dazzling, lighting up every room she entered. But comets burn out. The pressure to shine, to always be on, the subtle poisons of a world that valued appearance over substance, it had consumed her. After she was gone, the opulence of their life had felt like a tomb, each expensive object a monument to a happiness that had been, in the end, terrifyingly fragile. So, he had run. He had taken his daughter and the core of his fortune, tucking it away where it could do good without his name attached, and he had simply disappeared. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "She did." "Can we go?" Lily asked, her question so simple, so direct, it bypassed all his defenses. "To the party? For the hospital? They were nice to me when I broke my arm." He remembered that day, the terror of seeing her fall from the monkey bars, the frantic drive to St. Jude's, and the quiet, competent kindness of the doctors and nurses who had mended her small bone and calmed her big fears. They had treated him not as a walking bank account, but as a terrified father. He had written them a check then, an anonymous one for an amount that would have made the evening news, but it hadn't felt like enough. It had felt like a transaction, a way to assuage his guilt from a safe distance. This invitation was different. Marcus Thorne, his old friend and the only person left from his former life who knew the truth, was chairing the event. The invitation was a personal plea, a test. "Come see the good we're doing," Marcus had written in a note tucked inside. "Time to come out of the cold, old friend." Ethan looked from the glossy cardstock to his daughter's hopeful face. For 3 years, he had been in stasis, a man defined by his loss and his fear. He had convinced himself this hiding was a form of protection, a penance. But looking at Lily, he saw a flicker of her mother's light, a desire to engage with the world, not shrink from it. Was his fortress becoming her cage? What good was all his power, all his wealth, if he couldn't even grant his daughter's simple wish to go to a party for a cause that mattered? "I don't have a fancy suit, sweet pea," he said, his last line of defense. "You have your church suit," she replied instantly. "It's nice. And I have my flower girl dress from Cousin Sarah's wedding." He thought about that suit, a simple, dark gray wool bought off the rack. He thought about her dress, a sweet, simple white eyelet affair. They would stick out like dandelions in a rose garden. They would be judged, dismissed, looked down upon. A part of him, the wounded, cynical part, recoiled from the idea. But another part, a part he thought had died with Eleanor, felt a stubborn spark. Let them judge. He wanted to see this charity Marcus was so proud of. He wanted to see if it was real, or if it was just another stage for the wealthy to perform their magnanimity. He would go as he was now, a carpenter, a single father, a man with nothing to offer but his quiet presence. It would be his own test, not just of the charity, but of himself. "Okay, sweet pea," he heard himself say, the words feeling foreign and momentous. "Okay, we'll go to the party." Lily's gasp of delight was like a physical jolt to his system. She threw her arms around his neck, her small body radiating pure, uncomplicated joy. "Really? For real?" "For real," he whispered into her hair, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and the faint, lingering aroma of cinnamon from the bakery downstairs. For the first time in 3 years, he had made a choice not out of fear, but out of a fragile, burgeoning hope. He had no idea that this simple decision was the first step onto a path that would lead him straight into the heart of a storm. A storm that would either destroy the last of his defenses or finally force him to heal. The air inside the Fairmont Grand Ballroom was thick with the scent of money. It was a cloying perfume of expensive floral arrangements, competing colognes, and the faint, metallic tang of ambition. Ethan felt his shoulders tense the moment they stepped through the ornate doors. He had forgotten the sheer oppressive weight of a room like this, the way the hum of conversation was layered with the silent, constant calculus of status and power. He held Lily's hand tighter. She was a vision of innocence in her simple white dress, her eyes wide as she took in the cavernous space. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of people dressed in shimmering gowns and razor-sharp tuxedos. A string quartet played Vivaldi in a corner, their music almost entirely drowned out by the braying laughter and self-important chatter. "Wow," Lily breathed, her voice full of genuine awe. "It's like a castle." Ethan's own assessment was less charitable. It was like a beautiful, elaborate trap. He could already feel the probing glances, the quick, dismissive appraisals that took in his off-the-rack suit and his daughter's simple dress and filed them under irrelevant. He saw a woman in a diamond necklace that could have funded a new pediatric wing lean over to whisper to her companion, both of them casting a disdainful look in his direction. The old anger, hot and familiar, coiled in his gut. This was why he had left, this hollow pageantry. He took a deep breath, reminding himself why he was here. For Lily. To test the heart of the organization, not the vanity of its donors. He scanned the room for Marcus, but his friend was nowhere to be seen. Instead, his eyes landed on a woman who seemed as out of place as he felt, though for different reasons. She was standing near the silent auction tables, her brow furrowed in concentration as she adjusted a bid sheet. She wore a simple, elegant, dark blue dress that was professional rather than ostentatious. Her hair was pulled back in a slightly messy bun, as if she had been too busy to fuss with it. While everyone else performed for an invisible audience, she was working. He watched as a waiter jostled her, sloshing a bit of champagne onto the floor near her hem. The waiter muttered a careless apology and moved on, but the woman just knelt, blotted the spot on the carpet with a cocktail napkin, and went right back to her task. There was a quiet competence about her, a lack of ego that was as refreshing as a cool breeze in the stuffy room. "Daddy, I'm thirsty," Lily said, tugging on his sleeve. "Okay, sweet pea, let's find you some punch." He started to navigate a path through the dense crowd, feeling like a salmon swimming upstream. As they neared the auction tables, they passed the woman in the blue dress. Just then, a heavy-set man in a tuxedo backed away from a table without looking, bumping hard into Lily and knocking her off balance. "Hey, watch it." the man grumbled, turning to glower down at them as if it were their fault. Before Ethan could react, his protective instincts flaring, the woman in blue stepped forward. "Sir, I think you owe this little girl an apology," she said, her voice calm but firm. The man scoffed. "She was in my way. She's a child. And you were careless," the woman insisted, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "Are you all right, sweetie?" Lily, startled but unhurt, nodded shyly. Ethan looked at the woman, truly seeing her for the first time. Her eyes were a warm, intelligent brown, and they were fixed on the belligerent man with an unwavering resolve. The man, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged, puffed up his chest. "Do you know who I am?" "No," she said simply, "and at a charity event for sick children, I'm not sure it matters." "What matters is kindness." Her words hung in the air, a small pocket of genuine decency in the vast, echoing room. The man, flustered and clearly embarrassed by the attention they were now drawing, muttered something under his breath and stalked away. The woman immediately turned her full attention to Lily, her expression softening. "That was a bit scary, wasn't it? I'm Clara, by the way. I'm one of the people who helped put this party together." "I'm Lily," Lily said, her shyness evaporating under the warmth of Clara's smile. "And this is my daddy, Ethan. It's a pleasure to meet you both," Clara said, her gaze shifting to Ethan. He saw a flicker of curiosity in her eyes as she took in his simple attire, but it was followed immediately by a genuine, welcoming smile. There was no judgment, no dismissal. It was a look he hadn't received from a stranger in this world in a very long time. "Thank you for that," Ethan said, his voice rusty. "You didn't have to." "Of course I did," she replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "This night is supposed to be about community and compassion. That starts with how we treat each other, especially the smallest among us." She winked at Lily. "So, are you two enjoying the gala?" Lily was hoping for some punch, Ethan explained. "I can help with that," Clara said, her professional demeanor clicking back into place. "The non-alcoholic options are this way. Follow me." As she led them toward the refreshment table, she spoke with an infectious passion about the hospital, about the new equipment they were hoping to fund, about a specific little boy in the oncology ward who loved to draw superheroes. She wasn't reciting talking points, she was sharing stories. She was sharing her heart. Ethan found himself listening, truly listening. His cynicism, his armor, began to feel heavy and useless. He had come here expecting a hollow spectacle, and in the first 15 minutes, he had found a woman who embodied the very spirit of the cause. They reached the table, and Clara poured Lily a cup of bright red punch. As she handed it to her, she noticed Lily's simple white dress. "That's a beautiful dress, Lily," Clara said. "It was for my cousin's wedding," Lily said proudly. "My mommy picked it out. She's in heaven now." The direct, innocent statement landed with the force of a physical blow. Ethan tensed, waiting for the awkward platitude, the pitying glance. But Clara didn't offer either. She knelt down so she was at eye level with Lily. "Well, your mommy had wonderful taste," she said softly. "I bet she was a very special person." "She was," Lily agreed. She loved parties like this. A wave of grief, sharp and unexpected, washed over Ethan. He looked at Clara, who was now looking at him, her warm brown eyes full of a quiet, profound understanding. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss." She didn't have to. Her expression said it all. In that moment, he felt seen, not as a potential donor or a social misfit, but simply as a man carrying a heavy burden. He found himself wanting to talk to her, to know more about this woman who seemed to carry a light of her own in this dazzlingly dark room. He asked her about her work, about how she got involved with the hospital. Her story was simple. She had started as a volunteer, reading to the children, and her passion had become her profession. "It's not a job, really," she confessed, her voice dropping a little as she watched Lily carefully sipping her punch. "It's a calling. These kids, they're the bravest people I know, They deserve the best of everything. The best care, the best chance. That's what this night is for. Or what it's supposed to be for. A shadow of weariness crossed her face. Supposed to be? Ethan prompted gently. She sighed, a small, frustrated sound. Sometimes it feels like the mission gets lost in the production. People get more excited about who is wearing what than about the new neonatal incubator we're trying to buy. She glanced around the room, and for a second, he saw his own cynicism reflected in her eyes. But where his was a hard, protective shell, hers was a soft, pained disappointment. But then, she continued, her gaze returning to him and Lily, I meet people who are here for the right reasons, and it reminds me that it's all worth it. He felt a strange pull, a desire to tell her the truth, to tell her that he was one of the anonymous names on her donor list, that he believed in her mission more than she could possibly know. But the habit of hiding was too strong. The fear of what his name represented, the power, the pressure, the world that had broken his wife, kept him silent. So instead, he just said, My wife. She would have loved what you're doing. The confession was small, but it felt enormous. He was sharing a piece of Eleanor, a piece of his pain, with this virtual stranger. Clara's smile was gentle. Thank you. That means a lot. Before he could say more, a woman with a helmet of lacquered blonde hair and a dress that seemed to be woven from pure condescension descended upon them. She carried a clipboard like a weapon. Clara, there you are, the woman said, her voice a sharp, imperious bark. She completely ignored Ethan and Lily. The Mortimers are complaining about their table placement. Again, and I need you to handle it. I'm far too busy dealing with the VIPs. Of course, Beatrice, Clara said, her professional mask slipping back into place, though Ethan could see the strain around her eyes. Beatrice finally deigned to notice Ethan and Lily, her eyes flicking over them with unconcealed disdain. And who is this? She asked, her tone implying they were something unpleasant she had discovered on the bottom of her shoe. This is Ethan and his daughter Lily, Clara said, her voice steady. They're guests. Humph. Beatrice sniffed, making a note on her clipboard. Well, Clara, do try to focus on the guests who matter, the ones who write the checks. Not strays. The insult was so blatant, so cruel, that the air seemed to crackle. Ethan felt a white-hot rage surge through him. He opened his mouth to unleash the fury of a man who could buy and sell this woman's entire life with a single phone call. But then he looked at Lily, who was staring at Beatrice with wide, confused eyes, and he looked at Clara, whose face was a mixture of apology and mortification. Causing a scene would only make things worse. It would prove Beatrice right, in a way, that he didn't belong, that he didn't know how to behave in their world. It would ruin Clara's night and humiliate his daughter. So he swallowed his rage, the effort tasting like ash. He simply put a protective hand on Lily's back. Clara shot him a look of deep apology. I'm so sorry. I have to go deal with this. It was wonderful to meet you both. I hope I see you again before the night is over. She gave Beatrice a tight, professional nod and hurried away, a blue ship sailing back into a sea of sharks. Beatrice gave them one last withering glare before turning on her heel and marching off in the opposite direction. Daddy, Lily whispered, her small voice trembling slightly. Why was that lady so mean? Ethan knelt, pulling his daughter into his arms. Because some people, sweet pea, forget what's important. They get so caught up in the fancy dresses and the bright lights that they forget to be kind. He held her close, his heart aching. He had wanted to show her a world of generosity and hope. Instead, in less than half an hour, he had exposed her to the very poison he had tried so hard to protect her from. The fortress was breached, and the worst, he knew with a sickening certainty, was yet to come. The encounter with Beatrice left a sour taste in Ethan's mouth that no amount of sparkling water could wash away. He tried to steer Lily toward the parts of the evening that were meant to be inspiring, a display showcasing the children's artwork, a video presentation about the hospital's recent successes, but the shadow of that casual cruelty lingered. He could feel Beatrice's eyes on him from across the room, a constant judgmental surveillance that made the back of his neck prickle. He saw Clara a few more times, a flash of blue in the churning crowd. She was always busy, always putting out some fire, but each time their eyes met, she offered him a small, apologetic smile that somehow made the evening bearable. He found himself searching for her, a lighthouse in the fog of pretension. He saw her calming a flustered caterer, patiently explaining a bid process to an elderly couple, and even laughing with a group of doctors from the hospital. She was the event's beating heart. They decided to look at the silent auction items, a sprawling display of donated luxuries, weekend getaways, designer handbags, cases of vintage wine. Lily was fascinated by a large, framed photograph of a majestic-looking horse. "He's beautiful," she breathed, her small hand reaching out as if to stroke the glossy image. Ethan checked the bid sheet. The current bid was already in the thousands. Next to it, a jewel-encrusted watch was climbing toward $50,000. He thought about the neonatal incubator Clara had mentioned. How many of these trinkets would it take to buy one? The disconnect was staggering. He felt a presence beside him and turned to see Clara. "Find anything you like?" she asked, her smile a little tired but still genuine. "My daughter has her eye on the horse," he said, nodding toward the photograph. "Ah, Starlight. He's a former champion racehorse," Clara said. "The owner boards him at a lovely stable not far from here. The prize is a full day of riding lessons and a trail ride with him." She looked at Lily. "Do you like to ride?" Lily shook her head, her eyes still glued to the picture. "I've never been on a real horse, just the carousel." An idea, impulsive and warm, bloomed in Ethan's mind. He could win this for her. He could write down a number so high no one else would touch it. He reached for the pen. And then he stopped. He looked at the sheet, at the names of the city's elite who had already bid. His name, Ethan Vance, would be a bomb going off on this quiet little piece of paper. It would undo everything. The questions, the attention, the sudden, fawning shift in how everyone treated him. He wasn't ready. He couldn't do it. The habit of being invisible was too deeply ingrained. He put the pen down. "Maybe another time," he said, the excuse feeling flimsy even to his own ears. Clara's perceptive gaze lingered on him for a moment. She seemed to understand his hesitation, though she couldn't possibly know the reason for it. "Well," she said brightly, turning back to Lily, "even if you don't win the auction, I know a little community farm that has a very gentle pony named Patches. They let kids visit on the weekends. Maybe your dad could take you sometime." Lily's face lit up. "Could you, Daddy? Could we go see Patches?" He looked at Clara, at her simple, kind solution. She hadn't pushed or questioned. She had simply offered an alternative, a small, achievable piece of happiness. "Yeah, sweet pea," he said, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I think we could do that." "Good," Clara said, satisfaction in her voice. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I think the main presentation is about to begin. I need to make sure our guest of honor is settled." "The guest of honor?" Ethan asked. "The big donor for the new wing," she explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's been anonymous until tonight. It's all very mysterious. No one even knows what he looks like. Marcus Thorne is the only one who's met him. We're all dying to see who this secret savior is." She gave him a final warm smile. "Enjoy the speeches." She bustled off toward the main stage, and Ethan felt a cold dread wash over him. The anonymous donor. The secret savior. That was him. He was the 28th man, a code name Marcus had given him, representing the final, crucial donation that had pushed the expansion project over the top. He had agreed to let Marcus announce the donation, but he had insisted on remaining anonymous. He had never, ever agreed to be revealed. Panic began to claw at his throat. Marcus wouldn't betray his trust, would he? His friend knew how fiercely he guarded his privacy. But Marcus was also a showman, a man who understood the power of a grand gesture to inspire more giving. Had he misunderstood? Had Marcus decided that revealing Ethan was for the greater good? He needed to find Marcus. Now, leaving Lily mesmerized by the horse photograph, he began to push his way through the crowd, his earlier aimlessness replaced by a frantic urgency. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, and a hush fell over the crowd as Marcus Thorne, handsome and confident in his tuxedo, walked onto the stage. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He was too late. He was still several yards from the stage, trapped behind a wall of elegantly dressed people, when he felt a sharp tap on his shoulder. He turned, expecting an annoyed guest he had jostled. It was Beatrice. Her face was a mask of smug triumph. Two burly security guards flanked her. "There you are," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I knew you didn't belong here." "What is this?" Ethan asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I checked the guest list," she announced, loud enough for those nearby to turn and stare. "And then, I checked it again. There is no Ethan Vance on the list. There is no ticket purchased under your name. You, sir, are a trespasser." Murmurs rippled through the nearby crowd. People were turning, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. "There's been a mistake," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice even, trying to find Clara in the crowd, anyone who could vouch for him. But all he could see were judgmental faces, illuminated by the stage lights. "The only mistake was the lapse in security that allowed you to get this far," Beatrice snapped. "You come in here in your cheap suit, with your unkempt child, and you take advantage of our generosity, eating our food, drinking our beverages, trying to rub elbows with your betters. Did you think no one would notice?" The humiliation was absolute. It was a public crucifixion. He could see Lily now, standing by the auction table, her small face pale with confusion and fear as she watched the scene unfold. "I'm here as a guest of Marcus Thorne," Ethan said through gritted teeth. Beatrice let out a short, ugly laugh. "Mr. Thorne? The chair of this entire event? I highly doubt he associates with people like you. Now, you can leave quietly, or my associates here can escort you out. I'd hate for your daughter to see you forcibly removed." The threat, aimed directly at Lily, was the final blow. He could fight this. He could stand his ground and wait for Marcus to finish his speech and clear his name. But at what cost? Lily would have to watch this whole, ugly spectacle. She would see her father surrounded by security guards accused of being a criminal. The damage would be immeasurable. His anonymity, his quiet life, was not worth her pain. He looked past Beatrice's triumphant sneer to his daughter's terrified face, and in that moment, he made a choice. He would surrender. "Fine," he said, the word tasting like poison. "We'll leave." "A wise decision," Beatrice said, practically purring with victory. "Gentlemen, please show them the way out." The two guards moved to flank him, their presence a clear, physical threat. They didn't touch him, but their proximity was an act of intimidation. As he walked toward Lily, the crowd parted for him, people staring, whispering behind their hands. It was a walk of shame, each step a fresh wave of degradation. He reached Lily and scooped her into his arms. She buried her face in his neck, her small body trembling. "It's okay, sweet pea," he whispered, his own voice shaking with suppressed fury. "We're just going home now. The party's over." He didn't look back. He didn't look at the whispering guests, at the opulent room, or at the triumphant figure of Beatrice watching him go. He kept his eyes fixed on the exit, the ornate doors that now represented an escape. As he walked, one of the security guards trailing behind him like a prison escort, he could hear Marcus Thorne's voice booming from the stage. And now, Marcus was saying, his voice filled with theatrical excitement, "It is my distinct honor to talk about a man of incredible vision and generosity. A man who tonight will change the lives of thousands of children." Ethan pushed through the doors and into the quiet, cool air of the hotel lobby. The sound of the gala, the sound of his own public humiliation, was muffled behind him. He had been cast out. The test was over, and he had failed spectacularly. The cold, cynical part of him that he had tried so hard to suppress rose up, screaming, "I told you so!" He had stepped out of the cold, just as Marcus had asked, and had been thrown into the fire. The ride home was a study in suffocating silence. The city lights blurred past the windows of the pickup truck, a smear of indifferent colors. Lily had cried herself to sleep in her car seat, her face still blotchy and tear-streaked, her small hand clutching a fold of his jacket. Each sleeping breath she took was a fresh stab of guilt in Ethan's heart. He had exposed her to that ugliness. He had allowed that horrible woman to frighten her, to make her feel small and unwanted. His attempt to give her a glimpse of her mother's world had ended in disaster. He parked in their designated spot behind the bakery, the familiar scent of yeast and sugar doing nothing to soothe his frayed nerves. He carried Lily up the 2 flights of stairs, her warm, limp weight both a comfort and a burden of responsibility. He tucked her into her bed, carefully removing her simple white dress and draping it over a chair. In the soft glow of her nightlight, she looked so fragile, so innocent. He had built a fortress to protect this, and he had led the enemy right to the gate. Back in the living room, the silence of the small apartment was deafening. He sank onto the worn sofa, the springs groaning in protest. He was surrounded by the life he had so carefully constructed, the handcrafted bookshelf, the threadbare but comfortable armchair, the framed photos of a smiling Eleanor. It had once been his sanctuary. Tonight, it felt like a self-imposed prison, a monument to his own fear. He had run from the world of wealth and power because he blamed it for Eleanor's death. He had seen how it changed people, how it demanded a performance, how it could corrode the soul. He had wanted to raise Lily far from its toxic influence, to teach her that value was measured in character, not in bank balances. And what had happened? He had been judged, found wanting, and thrown out precisely because he had tried to live by those values. The irony was a bitter pill. He had gone to that gala as a test, and the world had confirmed his bleakest suspicions. It was a rigged game, a club with velvet ropes, and he had been denied entry because he wasn't wearing the right uniform. His rage at Beatrice had cooled into a deep, chilling despair. It wasn't just about her. She was just a symptom of the disease. The disease was the worship of wealth, the casual cruelty of status, the collective blindness to what truly mattered. And he, in his attempt to hide from it, had become powerless against it. The great Ethan Vance, the man who could move markets with a whisper, had been silenced and ejected by a petty social climbing hostess. He buried his face in his hands. What would Eleanor think? She had loved the good that could be done with their resources. She had believed in using their platform to champion the underdog. She would have been appalled by his retreat, by his cowardice. She would have stood her ground in that ballroom. She would have fought. He had not fought. He had tucked his tail and run, all under the guise of protecting his daughter. But was that the truth? Or was he just protecting himself from the pain of engagement, from the risk of getting hurt again? His phone buzzed on the coffee table, a jarring intrusion into his spiral of self-recrimination. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again, annoyed, he snatched it up, ready to silence it. The screen glowed with Marcus Thorne's name. He stared at it, his thumb hovering over the decline button. He didn't want to talk to Marcus. He didn't want to hear his apologies or his excuses. He wanted to be left alone in his misery. But the phone kept buzzing, a persistent, insistent demand. With a groan of resignation, he answered, his voice flat and dead. "What, Ethan? Thank God. Where in the hell are you?" Marcus's voice was a frantic crackle in his ear. "I've been looking all over for you. I just finished the speech. The big reveal. And you're gone." "I was escorted out, Marcus," Ethan said, the words heavy and metallic on his tongue. Apparently, carpenters in off-the-rack suits aren't welcome at your high society shindig. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, an explosion. They what? Who did? Who threw you out? The hostess, Beatrice something, said I was trespassing. Beatrice de Winter? Marcus's voice was laced with disbelief and fury. The head of the Gala committee? Ethan, I am so sorry. I was backstage going over the presentation. I had no idea. This is a catastrophe. It's fine, Ethan said, though it was anything but. It just proves my point. It's a world I don't belong in anymore. I never should have come. Don't say that. Marcus insisted, his voice rising. That's not true. You belong there more than anyone. You are the 28th man, Ethan. You're the cornerstone. This whole night, this whole expansion, it's happening because of you. You can't let some power-hungry socialite chase you away from your own party. It's not my party, Marcus. It's theirs. And they made that perfectly clear. He looked around the dark apartment. I'm done. I'm sending the rest of the pledged funds tomorrow, and that's it. My involvement is over. No, Marcus said, his voice dropping, becoming serious and firm. No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to retreat back into your shell. That's the easy way out. Think about why you made this donation in the first place. For Eleanor. For the kids who need that new wing. For every child like Lily who might need that hospital one day. Are you going to let a woman like Beatrice de Winter have the final say on Eleanor's legacy? Are you going to let her malice win? The words struck home, a direct hit on his most vulnerable point. Eleanor's legacy. He had been trying to honor it by hiding, but Marcus was right. Eleanor never hid from a fight, especially not one in the service of a good cause. What do you want me to do, Marcus? Ethan asked, his voice cracking. Go back there? Face that humiliation all over again? Yes, Marcus said, his voice ringing with conviction. Exactly that. You need to come back. Right now. You walk back into that ballroom not as the quiet carpenter they threw out, but as Ethan Vance. You show them who they dismissed. You show them what real power looks like. Not the petty power of a clipboard and a guest list, but the power to actually change the world. Don't do it for revenge. Do it for the hospital. Do it for Lily. Show your daughter that when someone knocks you down, you don't stay down. You get back up. Ethan was silent. His heart was a battlefield. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to stay put, to lock the door and shut out the world. It was safe here. No one could hurt him or Lily in this apartment. But Marcus's words echoed in his mind. Show your daughter. He thought of Lily's trembling body in his arms. He thought of her confused, frightened face. What lesson had he taught her tonight? That when confronted by bullies you run? That you let their judgment define you? Was that the legacy he wanted to pass down? No. A new feeling began to displace the despair. It was a slow, burning fire, a righteous anger that was cleansing and clarifying. He had spent 3 years defined by his grief. It was time to be defined by his purpose. He stood up, the sofa springs groaning again, but this time it sounded like a call to action. He walked to the window and looked down at the quiet street. He had a choice. He could stay here in the shadows, a ghost haunted by his past, or he could walk back into the light, not for the glamour or the prestige, but for the principle. Ethan? Are you there? Marcus's voice was anxious. Ethan took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. I'm on my way. The drive back to the Fairmont was different. The city lights no longer seemed indifferent. They seemed like runway lights, guiding him toward his destination. He wasn't returning to the Gala for revenge, he realized. Marcus was right about that. Revenge was Beatrice's world, a small, petty kingdom of spite. He was doing this to reclaim a part of himself he had abandoned. He was doing this to show his daughter, and himself, that you cannot let the cruelty of others extinguish your own light. He parked the pickup truck not in some distant corner of the lot, but in the valet lane right in front of the grand entrance. A young valet in a red jacket rushed forward, his expression initially dismissive as he took in the dusty, dented vehicle. "Sir, this lane is for guest drop-off only," he began. Ethan met the young man's eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flash any money. He simply held his gaze and said, with a quiet authority that had been dormant for 3 years, "I'm a guest." "Park the truck." The valet faltered, something in Ethan's demeanor shifting his perception. He saw not a poor man in a cheap truck, but a man of immense, understated power. "Yes, sir," the valet mumbled, taking the keys. "Right away, sir." Ethan walked through the hotel lobby, his stride long and confident. He wasn't the same man who had been ejected an hour earlier. That man had been stooped by the weight of his past. This man was standing tall, fueled by a clear and unwavering purpose. He reached the ballroom doors. He could hear the murmur of the crowd inside, the clinking of glasses. He pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The effect was instantaneous. Marcus was on stage, looking anxiously toward the entrance. When he saw Ethan, a huge grin of relief and triumph spread across his face. He was in the middle of a sentence, but he stopped cold. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice booming through the silent room. "Please forgive the interruption. It seems we have had a terrible, terrible misunderstanding this evening." Every head in the room turned toward the entrance, every eye fixed on Ethan. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, his gaze sweeping across the sea of stunned faces until he found the one he was looking for. Beatrice de Winter was standing near the stage, her face pale. As she recognized him, her expression shifted from confusion to sheer, unadulterated horror. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "Earlier tonight," Marcus continued, his voice resonating with theatrical gravity, "a man was asked to leave our event. A man who, through a gross and inexcusable error in judgment, was deemed not to belong here." A wave of whispers swept the room as people put the pieces together. The disheveled man who had been thrown out. The man now standing at the entrance, holding the entire room captive with his presence. "I am here to correct that error," Marcus declared. "Ladies and gentlemen, the anonymous donor, the man I have been telling you about, the man whose unprecedented generosity has single-handedly funded the new Eleanor Vance pediatric wing at St. Jude's, is that man right there." Marcus pointed directly at Ethan. "Please join me in finally welcoming the heart and soul of this entire project. My friend, Mr. Ethan Vance." A collective gasp went through the ballroom. The name Vance, a name synonymous with one of the largest but most private fortunes in the country, hung in the air like a thunderclap. The whispers exploded into a roar of shock and excitement. People were standing up, craning their necks, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. The woman who had sneered at his suit now looked as if she might faint. The man who had knocked into Lily looked physically ill. But Ethan barely noticed them. His eyes were locked on Beatrice. Her face had gone from white to a mottled, sickly gray. The clipboard she had wielded with such authority slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. The sound was lost in the rising tide of applause that was now sweeping the room. It was a total, crushing victory, a public vanquishing more complete than anything he could have imagined. But as he stood there, bathed in the sudden, blinding light of adulation, he felt no joy in it. He felt no pleasure in Beatrice's humiliation. His purpose for returning had not been this. He ignored the applause, ignored the shocked faces, and began to walk, not toward the stage, not toward Marcus, but through the parting crowd, his eyes scanning the room for the only person whose reaction mattered. He found her near the back, by the same auction tables where they had spoken. Clara was standing stock still, her hand pressed to her mouth. Her warm brown eyes were wide with a complex storm of emotions: shock, confusion, dawning understanding, and something else. something that looked like hurt. That look, more than Beatrice's cruelty or the crowd's fawning, was what finally pierced his armor. He had hidden the truth from her, too. In his quest for anonymity, he had been dishonest with the one person in this whole room who had shown him genuine kindness. He reached her, the noise of the room fading into a dull roar around them. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet. She just stared at him, shaking her head slightly, as if trying to clear it. "Ethan Vance?" she whispered, the name sounding foreign. "The Ethan Vance? I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it more than anything he had ever said. "I should have told you. I never meant to deceive you." "Why?" she asked, her voice small and wounded. "Why the secrecy? The simple suit? The everything?" "Because of that," he said, gesturing vaguely at the ridiculous spectacle now unfolding around them. "The name, the money, it changes things. It changes how people see you. It puts a wall between you and everything real. I lost my wife to that world. I didn't want to lose myself, or my daughter, too. I came here tonight as myself, just a father, to see if this cause was real, to see if the people behind it were real." He looked her directly in the eyes, willing her to understand. "You were real," he said. "You were the only thing that felt real in this entire room." Her expression softened, the hurt giving way to a flicker of understanding. "The Eleanor Vance wing," she said, her voice barely audible. "Your wife." He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "She believed in using our privilege for good. Not for show, but for real, tangible good. After she was gone, I didn't know how to do that without the show. So I hid. Tonight was the first time I tried to step out. And we threw you out," she said, her face crumpling with shame. "I let Beatrice. Oh God. I am so sorry, Ethan. I should have fought harder for you. I should have." "No." He interrupted gently. "You were the one person who fought for me at all. You were kind to my daughter. You saw us as people. That's all that matters." Just then, Marcus arrived, clapping Ethan on the back. "There you are. They're going wild. Come on, you have to say a few words." Ethan shook his head. He looked from Marcus's beaming face to Clara's worried one. He knew what he had to do. The performance was over. It was time for the real work to begin. "No speeches," he said firmly. He turned his full attention back to Clara. "But I do want to get more involved. Not as a name on a wing, but as a person. I want to serve on the board. I want to help you with strategy, with outreach. I want to help you build this thing properly." Clara stared at him, her eyes shining. "Really?" "Really," he confirmed. "This can't just be about one night and one big check. It has to be about a sustained commitment. That's what Eleanor would have wanted." And, he added, a small, genuine smile finally reaching his own lips, "It's what I want." He was no longer hiding. He was integrating the two halves of his life, the resourceful, powerful man of means and the compassionate father who valued simple kindness. He was finally becoming whole, and it was all because a woman in a simple blue dress had stood up for his daughter and offered to show her a pony named Patches. In the end, it was not the grand gesture of the donation that had saved him, but that small, profound act of grace. 6 months later, the crisp autumn air felt clean and honest. Ethan stood on a small, grassy hill overlooking a construction site. The steel skeleton of the new Eleanor Vance pediatric wing was rising against a brilliant blue sky, a tangible symbol of hope and healing. There was no gala, no tuxedos, just the clang of hammers and the shouts of workers. A small hand slipped into his. "Is that where the new rooms for the kids will be, Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice bright. "That's right, sweet pea," Ethan said, squeezing her hand. "And over there is where they'll build the new playroom with the big windows." "With a space for drawing superheroes?" Ethan smiled. With a huge space for drawing superheroes. A comfortable warmth spread through his chest. He was a different man from the one who had hidden in his small apartment, terrified of the world. He was now the most active member of the St. Jude's Board of Directors. He had personally overseen the firing of the entire Gala committee, including a disgraced Beatrice de Winter who had vanished from the city's social scene. He had helped Clara restructure the entire fundraising department, shifting the focus from one extravagant, exclusive annual event to a series of smaller, more inclusive community-based initiatives. He had found a way to use his skills, his mind for business and strategy that he had long suppressed, for a cause that filled him with purpose instead of dread. He was no longer just a name on a check. He was a force for good, present and accounted for. He felt a gentle touch on his arm and turned to see Clara standing beside him, a thermos in her hand. She wore jeans and a cozy sweater, and her face, free from the stress of managing a high-strung gala, was relaxed and happy. "Thought you two might be getting chilly," she said, pouring steaming hot chocolate into 2 cups. She handed one to Lily and the other to Ethan, her fingers brushing against his. The simple touch sent a familiar, pleasant jolt through him. Over the past 6 months, their professional collaboration had blossomed into a deep and quiet friendship, which was now, tentatively, becoming something more. They spent weekends together, visiting the pony named Patches, going for hikes, and having lazy Sunday breakfasts in his small apartment. She and Lily adored each other. Clara had seamlessly become a part of their small, quiet world, filling it with a warmth and laughter Ethan had thought was lost to him forever. "Thank you," he said, his eyes meeting hers over the rim of the cup. He wasn't just thanking her for the hot chocolate, he was thanking her for everything. For seeing him when he was invisible, for reminding him of who he was meant to be. She seemed to understand. Her smile was soft and full of affection. "It's looking amazing, isn't it?" she said, nodding toward the rising structure. Eleanor would be so proud. He didn't flinch at her name anymore. Clara had helped him see that honoring Eleanor's memory wasn't about preserving it in amber, but about carrying her spirit of generosity forward into the future. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She would. They stood there for a long time, the 3 of them, a small, unlikely family, watching the future being built. The ghosts of the past had finally been laid to rest. The fortress he had built around his heart had been dismantled, not by a battering ram, but by the patient, persistent power of kindness. He was no longer the wounded hero in hiding, or the cynical billionaire. He was just Ethan, a father, a partner, a man who had found his way out of the cold and into the warmth of a new, authentic life, a life of purpose and a life of love. The party, he realized, was just beginning.